we're now moving on to session 3, which is our environmental, sustainability and land management session, which will be chaired by Ruth Dancer from Griffin, who will also introduce the session with a presentation.
Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for inviting me here today to chair this next session, Environmental Sustainability and Land Management. And what an incredible session to follow, talking about the Olympics from Tim and Helen. Absolutely inspiring, and it reminds me why I get up every morning and do what I do, because the platform that we have as equestrians on the global stage really speaks to what we can do for the environment too, and that soft power and the scale that David Manford spoke about earlier this morning. It demonstrates that we're not just a small sector, we have huge impact. And we have an excellent panel waiting to speak with you after me, who I'm looking forward to introducing, and there'll be a Q&A at the end, so get ready with your questions and please feel free to send those through as we go. On that vein, oh, no, don't want that. Can we move on to our slide with our question on? No? Okay. Yes, there we go. So we're very, very keen on baselining in Griffin and understanding where we're at and where we're going. So as an individual or organisation, do you have a plan in place to address environmental sustainability? And when we started this process, as you'll see in the timeline later on, there were around about 5 to 8% of organisations that had started to think about this. And what I'm going to talk about today is where we're at and how far we've come in such a short space of time, because you'll see on the screen, we've already got 55%, more than half of the room who are now thinking and acting in this space. And it's 4 months or more since Rowley very generously asked me to deliver my speech at the World Horse Welfare Conference. And during the Q&A panel, I was asked, what is the industry doing and is there a plan? And unfortunately, it was during a quick fire session. I was only allowed to give one word answer, and the answer was yes. So I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes just expanding a smidge on that answer and really injecting a little bit more positivity and enthusiasm around that topic to let you all know that essentially you're in a really safe space when it comes to this topic. You are not alone, and as you can see from the screen, we're now up to 57%. I'm very fortunate that I spend every day of my life delivering workshops and talking to individuals about this topic. And environmental sustainability means a lot of things to a lot of different people. You can see some of the words on the screen. But there are 3 words or phrases that crop up in every single conversation I have. And I'm actually incredibly delighted. I've been queued up beautifully by David this morning because he mentioned the word more than 4 times in his speech. Collaboration, learning from other industries, and sharing of best practice. Those 3 phrases are always mentioned, whether I'm in a university, a stable, a livery yard, or talking to federations. And I'm absolutely convinced that by embracing those 3 and carrying them through in environmental sustainability, we will be successful in delivering a sustainable future for the equine world. And I'm often told that our world is conservative, traditional. I personally don't think either of those things are terribly bad, but also behind the times, unwilling to change. The timeline I've put up on the screen, I think paints a very, very different picture. And my experience of working with all of you pertaining to environmental sustainability is that is not the case. And I want to emphasize the speed, positivity, and progressiveness of organizations and individuals working in this topic. In the green, you'll see that pre-2021, there were a very small group of what I suppose I'd call early adopters, people who since, from a sporting point of view, since 2012, they recognised that environmental sustainability was important and they began to address those needs. And then in 2021, the British Horse Racing Authority, funded by the Racing Foundation, commissioned our report into environmental sustainability. And from that point on, we've really kick-started change. We as an industry, not we as Griffin, we as an industry have kick-started change. And it felt almost as if that report gave people the confidence and perhaps even permission to embrace it and, more importantly, speak out about it. And what we saw was businesses start to address this in a very, very meaningful way. Towards the end of that year, the British Equestrian Federation and Horse Sport Ireland then supported expanding on that knowledge and research project, not just by looking at it from an equestrian angle, rather than just horse racing, but also enabling us to look at very key topics like ecotoxicity and that more developed relationship of horse welfare and considerations we need to bring to bear there. And it's the 6 months from that point that I really want to focus on. And again, refer back to, we're an industry that doesn't like change. But we've gone, in the space of a short space of time, from knowing virtually nothing about the environmental impact on and of our industry to having 2 rather weighty tomes of research and businesses starting to initiate change. So the first of which, York Racecourse, really showing up to the plate, putting horse racing on the global stage from an environmental sustainability point of view by signing up to the UN Sport for Climate Action Framework. They were the first independent racecourse worldwide to do that. That was a really bold, brave thing that they did, but they were able to do that because they've already reduced their emissions by more than 50%. Not only does that show that it can be done, but it has been done. They did it themselves, and they have a financially sustainable business. Then we move on to the British Equestrian and Horse Sport Ireland reports being released, and we start to see more racecourses releasing their information. They had been working on environmental sustainability long before, but now they have the confidence. So we get Ascot, Ripon, Fakenham and more all coming out with the actions that they're taking. And the Racecourse Association also adding a substantial prize to the Racecourse Association annual awards, whereby the Racing Foundation now give £20,000 to the most sustainable racecourse. These are not small things. The British Racing School launching the first British horse racing and environmental sustainability course, of which we have 2 more this year if you wish to go on. Those again funded by the Racing Foundation. So the industry is able to attend free of charge to learn and skill up and tool up. And then against the backdrop of the European Equestrian Federation putting their strategy out and really saying that equestrians are showing up for the environment, we then start to get these big power plays like the World Horse Welfare Conference, which was solely dedicated to environmental sustainability. That was a big move, and I think Rowley would perhaps agree that there may have been a few eyebrows raised to say, well, why is a horse welfare charity dedicating all this time to the environment? But they adeptly demonstrated that horse welfare and environmental sustainability are 2 sides of the same coin. They cannot live independently of one another. And then at the end of that year, the British Equestrian Federation united their member bodies with a vision for environmental sustainability and equestrianism, shortly followed by the first ever equestrian sustainability strategy by British show jumping and British dressage. So, as I say, we go in a very rapid space of time, just in Britain, against the European backdrop, of not a great deal of activity happening, to suddenly normalising the topic. And individuals in this room, and you all know who you are, who are showing incredible leadership in driving forward a consistent message for change. And all this is being done in a strategic way, because we do have a little bit of a benefit of a blank canvas. Because there wasn't quite so much going on, we can be very intelligent in our approach on this. So the initial work, as you saw, has been going on at a federation and member body and organisational level to set standards and visions and pathways. In the layer underneath, this enables large organisations, events, venues, the supply chain, to do what they need to do to prepare for this changing world. And all of that means that that huge swathe underneath of participants and smaller businesses can understand how this impacts them and can begin to get resources so that they can change in a way that is financially sustainable and to live within their means. All of which means that the equestrian world is collaborating for nature. And we see that spirit of collaboration peppered through this timeline. First of all, the British Equestrian Federation and Horse Sport Ireland joining forces in the tender process, saving money, time, effort and learning from one another by doing the report together. Then York Racecourse collaborating with global sporting organisations to understand and learn from them, how do I accelerate change? the BEF and their industry vision, all member bodies joining together. And finally, British show jumping and British dressage strategy. Yes, they share an office, but what they're also doing is they're making sure they're talking in one voice to their venues and organisers to avoid confusion, to make things simple. And that sharing of best practice and collaboration, I think I just want to talk about that overlap. Because what I know for sure, even though, we as White Griffin are a commercial entity, but I believe passionately that there should be no IP in environmental sustainability. In the equine world, what benefits one benefits us all. And in that spirit, I'm delighted to announce that the British Equestrian will be launching later on this year a hub of resources that, yes, it's driven by British Equestrian, but it will benefit the entire equine British world. Everything from understanding the climate crisis and how it impacts equestrians to tools, resources, the all-important case studies and sharing of best practice. So whether it's polo or point-to-point, there will be resources available for people to access. And those resources are also going to be as part of a collaboration whereby other parts of the business will be able to ensure that their stakeholders are being supported through that. And those resources are being created right now. So whilst the hub will inevitably take time to create, it's a tech resource, so these things take time, but certainly by the end of this year, the resources will become available as we go so that people don't have to wait. And I'm delighted to announce the first of those resources is launched today, and that's the first nationwide equine carbon calculator. So if you choose to, you can enter that website detail on your phone now, and you'll find this free-to-use resource that has been created, again, by a collaboration of incredible organisations, Hartpury University, Sparshot College Group, and Derby College Group, along with ourselves. And by creating this tool, using or with those academic institutions, we're doing maybe one of the most important elements of collaboration for the future. Because with the help of Landex, this tool is being rolled out to all of the agricultural equine colleges and universities UK-wide, the length and breadth of the country, so that carbon calculation and an understanding of environmental sustainability can be embedded into learning for those entering the workplace. And equally, all of the member bodies and federations and organisations from horse racing and polo in the room have also been provided with all this information for it to go onto their website, so that absolutely everyone currently working in equestrian right now can start entering their details. And that means that we have this connectivity between those learning and those in practice, and we demystify this process of baselining, carbon calculating, what does it all mean, how does it all work? And with the support of British Equestrian and other partners coming on board, once you understand your baseline, you can then use the Resources Hub to figure out how you can reduce your impact or enhance the ways in which you're positively benefiting. Because the calculator will allow you to understand your emissions, but it will also tell you about the carbon stored within your land. And this is incredibly important because not only does it empower industry and individuals to know where their hotspots are, maybe even more importantly, it enables organisations like British Equestrian, or indeed all the way through to the Horse Council, to finally have industry-wide data. How much water do we use? How much energy do we use? What are our emissions? How much land do we have? What proportion of hedgerows exist across the spectrum of the industry? And we can use that data. I'm not interested in your names or your yard name or anything like that. That's all protected by GDPR. But we can use that data to feed through to the individuals in the room who are working with DEFRA and other entities to lobby on your behalf for funding, for resources, for additional tools that will help the industry, that bottom part of the pyramid, with progressing on. And what's important about the Equine Carbon Calculator is it was created by Farm Carbon Toolkit. And Farm Carbon Toolkit have been around for more than 10 years working in the agricultural space. They're one of only 3 carbon calculators that is actually shared by the NFU of over 60. And it's this specialism, this learning from agriculture that I want to finish today's session on. Because, again, at the beginning, we talked about collaboration, we talked about sharing of best practice, but the third of those phrases was learning from other industries. And we tend to focus on events, and we also focus on sport. And that's understandable. But through the work that I did with Horsesport Ireland, I'm absolutely convinced of the value of agriculture and the work that has been going on for a long time in supporting farmers with tooling up, preparing, getting ready, and understanding sustainable land management techniques. This is fundamental to our success and survival in the future. And again, referring back to those statistics that David Manford shared earlier on, we potentially can create huge positive change through our improved land management techniques. And I'm delighted that Denis Duggan will be taking the stage shortly, and he's going to shed a lot more light on this topic. So I'm going to stop there, because Denis's experience, both personally and with Horsesport Ireland, are really second to none in this space. But first, I would like to bring the presentation full circle, because at the very beginning I talked about early adopters, people pre-2021 who already understood that environmental sustainability is important in this space. And one of those groups was the Thoroughbred Breeders Association. And when I spoke with the TBA as part of the research program back in 2021, they were one of very, very few stakeholders who were already on this pathway. And they know that their breeders rely on the land, that this is an important topic for them, and they have been tooling up. They've been working busily behind the scenes. And one of those tools is a very specific, very cutting-edge carbon tool that really supports breeders with the very unique life cycle of a horse, that breeders really need to be able to calculate what they do. So I have great pleasure in bringing to the stage Simon Cox of the Thoroughbred Breeders Association and Sarah Wynn of RSK ADAS, who are going to talk you through that.
Well done. Thank you, Ruth. Good morning, Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen. So as Ruth gave the intro, I'm going to give you Sarah and I are going to give you about 10 minutes on our carbon calculator tool. This has been launched and is being rolled out and deployed as we speak across thoroughbred breeders in Great Britain. So hopefully it can provide you with some sort of further stimulus and ideas for the rest of the session. I think I need the clicker, Ruth.
I was going to get something done today. There.
Thank you. Okay. So firstly, a very quick introduction to the TBA. We are the Thoroughbred Breeders Association. We are a registered charity, and we represent and support about 2,000 breeders across Britain. One of our key strategic objectives has been for quite a while now, environmental sustainability. So it's something, as Ruth mentioned, we've been working on for a little while. We've also had great partnership. Collaboration seems to be the order of the day. We had great partnership with the Racing Foundation. The Racing Foundation, as some of you probably know, was set up a while ago to invest behind improving and sustaining British racing. So they've been great partners, and they've been very keen to see us act really as the tip of the spear, so that we can develop a tool that then can be deployed across certainly the racing industry. We've had an environmental work group for quite a while in the TBA. We've provided quite a lot of guidance to our members on things like improving biodiversity on stud farms, etc. But we decided last year that we needed to continually up our game. I think we all understand that the environment and climate change is an accelerating concern, and we need to deal with this. So we made this a full standing committee of the board last year. I chair that committee. And what we decided was the first thing we should do was develop a carbon calculator tool, so across the breeding industry we could understand our impact and do something about it. We went through a really robust process of selecting a partner. We wanted something that was easy to use but not simplistic. We wanted to make sure that it was really grounded in good data. There are lots of tools out there that will take you down all sorts of blind alleys on offsetting and stuff. We wanted something that was based on the latest current science. And we wanted something that we could adapt as we went along and build on in a modular way, or adjust as new data and science came to light. We're delighted with it. ADAS have been great partners, and to give you a bit more detail, I'm going to hand on to Sarah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will just introduce you a little bit more to the carbon calculator. So I actually come from an agricultural background, so my professional career is with an agricultural background. So we have tried to bring our understanding of carbon counting within the agriculture sector to the development of this tool and try and short-circuit some of the learning, really. And we've covered off some of the reasons why we might want to create a carbon calculator. We've got net zero legislation within the UK. That tells us that we need to get to net zero by 2050, and that covers everybody within the UK, so it includes all sectors, including equine. But in order to be able to reduce our emissions, we need to be able to understand where our emissions are coming from, such that we can target our actions appropriately. And that's where the carbon calculator comes in. So this is an example of what our carbon calculator looks like. It has a variety of different tabs in it. You can flow through from different areas. You can enter the type of land that you have, how that land is managed, so what types of nitrogen fertilizer you're applying, whether you're using organic materials like manures to fertilize your land, whether you're taking forage crops off those land areas. You can also enter information about whether you've got woodland or hedgerows and those sorts of things to ensure that you are capturing everything on your farm. You can then enter details of the horses that are present. So what types of animals are present, how long they're present for. And when we were looking at the stud farms, one of the key things was the fact that the horses tend to have lots of movements on and off the farms. They're not always there for a whole year. So having the ability to manage the time frames that the horses are present. And we've got lots of categories of horses in there to allow people to select what they want. And we can also use non-stud farm categories as well. And there are various other categories that are in the tool, but I don't really want to spend all of the session now covering those off. So this is an example of one of the footprints that came through recently. This is actually a stud farm that has not only horses, but has other livestock on it as well. And the calculator that we've built enables you to capture those other livestock too. So we can see on this footprint that the main source of emissions on this particular farm were feed. So the bagged feed that is going into supporting the growth and production of those horses, stud cubes, prep mix, balancers, etc. The next main source of emissions is the enteric methane emissions. And if you listen to the press, you'll hear all about enteric methane from cattle. And actually, the majority of this enteric methane is from the sheep or the cattle that are present on the farm, not from the horses. Horses only have one stomach. They don't produce as much methane as ruminant livestock. The other key area of emissions are things such as the bedding, and we also have fuel usage on the farm as well. Fuel might be being used for the vehicles that are transporting the animals. It's also the electricity for supporting the buildings, etc. This particular farm didn't use much fertilizer, therefore it doesn't have emissions associated with that. What's been interesting, and the tool has only been out for a very short while, so we've only got very limited data, and to be able to draw true conclusions, we will need to collect more data. But the key things that we've found is that we've got very different information on the different farms about where the key sources are, which makes it all the more important that we do these assessments. It's not like we've got one predictable source of emissions. We've presented the data per horse day so that you can compare between farms that have lots of different movements of horses. But in order to get an understanding of what a typical emission per horse day is, we will need more data. We're seeing hotspots on some farms of transport where there's a lot of movements, where you've got lots of visiting mares coming to see the stallions. That can be a hotspot on the farm. I mentioned feed on the footprint that I showed you. Energy consumption is another one. On some of the farms, there may be more energy consumption. And then other livestock. So where other livestock are being used to support the grazing management, those livestock can actually contribute far more emissions than the horses themselves. So where do we want to go next with the industry in terms of reducing our climate impact? Well, some of the key things that we have found is there's actually limited, really good data available on some of the raw materials that are used within the equine industry. There's data available within the agriculture sector, but how do we translate that into the equine industry? So things like bedding. The bedding companies are just starting to produce their footprints, but we will need better quality data on bedding to understand what beddings have the lowest or highest impact. We also need to think about how we use that bedding. There are places, it's quite common practice, where we use large amounts of bedding to produce these beautiful, clean, fluffy beds. But actually, environmentally, is that the best way of managing our bedding? Are there other ways that we can manage the bedding to ensure we keep the welfare piece, but also are not wasting those resources? And hay would be the same. So although that was a relatively low part of the footprint, how can we actually minimize things like the wastage associated with the hay? How can we feed it to reduce trampling, soiling, etc.? And transport's a bit of a thorny one because we don't have the availability of electric vehicles so easily for the transport of horses. So how do we decarbonize our transportation? And then, as I mentioned, accuracy of data is going to be a key thing going forwards. Getting the feed companies, getting the bedding companies, the supplement companies to be able to start thinking about what the embedded emissions are associated with the production of their materials, such that we can improve the accuracy of our understanding in the industry of where our hotspots are. So who can use this calculator? At present, it's available to the TBA members, but we are looking at options to make it available to the wider industry, and the various different functionalities in the tool are as relevant to any other sector of the industry. So it can be easily adapted for others to use. So my key message is, greenhouse gas emission assessment can help us to target our actions. But because we've found that different farms have different hotspots, it becomes all the more important that actually you do assess your own emissions, because what's a hotspot for one may not be a hotspot for another. And typically, we're seeing feed, fuel, and other livestock dominate those footprints. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah, and to Simon too. And it's absolutely great, as I say, to have those early adopters paving the way and really explaining and showing how the breeders tool works as we launch this equine carbon calculator tool nationwide. It's great to be able to use that experience. I now have great pleasure in inviting to the stage Denis Duggan from Horsesport Ireland, who is a fantastic font of all knowledge when it comes to not just equine, but has a huge background in agriculture and is also just a thoroughly good chap. But I have to say, I'm sorry, and I'm afraid that not everyone in the room is going to be supporting Team GB at the Olympics, because we've got Sonia and Denis here, and it's a stretch to ask the Irish to cheer us on. Denis, over to you.
Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honour and a privilege for me to address you today on behalf of the National Equestrian Federation in Ireland, Horsesport Ireland, to outline the environmental collaborations that we've undertaken with Jim Eyre and the team in BEF over the last 12 months or more, effectively taking sustainable strides for equestrianism on our two islands. To give you first of all some background about HSI, or Horsesport Ireland, we are the national governing body, very similar, almost equivalent to the BEF. We're an all-island body across both sides of the border, in Northern Ireland and the Republic. And as the National Federation, we're probably globally unique in that we house within one federation support for breeding and production of Irish-bred horses through financial supports. We're also the passport issuing authority for Irish drafts and Irish sport horses in the main. And side by side, those functions operate with our sporting roles in coaching, education, the promotion of sport and recreation, and our world-class high-performance teams, right up from youth pathways to the Olympic programs. It's great to see Helen earlier wearing green. I don't know if that's a sign for this weekend or for the summer, but maybe it's this weekend. There is no doubt that sustainability and climate action are hot topics in almost every industry, as Ruth touched on earlier, for the last few years. It's worth pausing for a moment to reflect on where the original definition of sustainability came from. The United Nations tasked the former Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Brundtland in 1983 with chairing a World Commission on Environment and Development. Her report in 1987, I'll repeat that, yes, 1987, defined sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising future generations' ability to meet their own needs. And the Brundtland Commission also had helpfully identified 3 pillars, or conceptualised 3 pillars of sustainability, being environment, economic and social equity. And over the years we've seen, from time to time, we've seen probably too often where the 3 pillars have been imbalanced, where maybe the economic needs are outweighed against the environmental needs or social needs, and vice versa. And we're now facing in, as a result of that, to a climate crisis that's probably putting a more substantial focus, and rightly so, on the environmental pillar of that sustainability. It's also worth considering for a minute that climate change did not emerge as a problem at COP21 a number of years ago in Paris, or last year at COP28. The very first, or one of the very early COPs, was in Kyoto in around about 97. And it conceptualized the concept of needing reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. My point here is that we've known about greenhouse gas emissions for nearly 30 years. We've known about sustainability for nearly 40 years. And some would argue we've probably not done enough. So what have we done? In Ireland, our predominant focus in the last number of years has been on our agricultural systems, and what I suppose ultimately our agricultural sector can control in that environment, particularly our dairy and beef industry. We would claim to have some of the lowest carbon footprint beef and dairy products in the world because of our grass-based systems, not too dissimilar to here in the UK. Our National Food and Agriculture Development Agency, Teagasc, have developed carbon navigators for particularly and predominantly beef and dairy. And it's great to see that Griffin have developed a carbon calculator along with other collaborators for the equestrian sector, and I'm looking forward to conversations with Ruth later about how we can adopt that in an Irish setting. In the Federation, we had been having conversations in probably around the summer of 2022. We'd been asking ourselves internally as a management team, what do we need to do? What are the equestrian targets within the legislation, climate action and so on? Is there any organisation looking at the impact of the environmental footprint of equestrianism? We knew that there was quality assurance schemes and action plans and targets, and media have not been shy about highlighting the 30% reduction that we have in Ireland by 2030, and then reaching net zero, as mentioned earlier, by 2050, targets coming out of COP. But our concern was that we were doing nothing. We weren't even talking amongst our stakeholders about it. And very fortuitously, just as we were starting to have those discussions, we spotted on LinkedIn, one of the team spotted on LinkedIn a tender that Jim Eyre and the team in BEF had put out on social media and elsewhere, looking for environmental research consultants. And as good fortune would have it, both Jim and myself met on the fringes of a European Equestrian Federation meeting in late summer of 2022. And that discussion laid the foundations for an exploration of how we could expand that research that the BEF were undertaking to also cover Ireland. I returned home, and a colleague of mine was Sonia Egan, who joins me here today, secured funding to fund the Irish dimension of that research from our Department of Agriculture. There is an old saying in Ireland, Gurian Bert Boher. It's probably the Chinese equivalent, to take some of the themes from earlier today. It's probably the Chinese equivalent of a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. So Gurian Bert Boher means that 2 people shorten the journey. And from that initial conversation with Jim, and his return to the BEF board and seeking their view on the collaboration with Horse Sport Ireland, Sonia securing funding from our government through the Department of Agriculture, we were in a very fortuitous position that collectively we were delighted to be able to appoint our wonderful chair today, Ruth Dancer, and the team in Griffin, to do that collective research across both federations. And in August of last year at the Dublin Horse Show, we reached the culmination of that research where the Irish dimension of it was published at the Horse Show. It is very fair to say that as a result of that research, that working together and working collaboratively, we have shortened the journey for both federations and both nations in terms of equestrianism and environmentalism. During the research, it was very apparent that there are significant similarities between equestrian sport in the UK and Ireland, namely the functions and structures of both federations. However, Ruth and the team did have to overcome more differences than either Jim or myself anticipated at the very outset. We naively thought that both federations are the same. We fly horses all over the world for competition. Climate-wise, environmental-wise, we operate in the same temperate climate, that this will be a very simple piece of research. But it was a lot more complicated as Ruth and the team got under the hood. The different regulatory frameworks between the UK and Ireland, the structures of our sport, for example, pose challenges, particularly in the Irish context, for Ruth and the team. But one of them, probably the more significant challenges, or maybe even opportunities and differences that emerged, was how connected Irish equestrianism is with the political system in Ireland, mainly due to the fact that we have government support of 7 to 10 million per annum into the industry. And it's very heartening to see the report from David earlier about political activism from UK equestrianism, particularly in the run into elections. And to give you some sense of hope and what the future might look like, in 2023, a group of equine farmers in Ireland had formed a number of different groups. We had an economic group that was mainly representative of business owners, riding schools, riding centres, sales yards and so on. We had an equine task force that Ruth would have met and the team would have met as part of their research. The equine task force was mainly breeders that had came together to lobby government in particular for increased funding. And last year, in response to that, our government made for the first time in probably 10 to 15 years, had made equine measures and equine farming eligible for on-farm investments out of single farm payments and so forth. And research that we had done to support that had indicated that there would be the demand over the next 7 years from equine farmers of perhaps up to 300 million euros in financial need for walkers, barns, muck heap management, environmental measures, and so forth. And it is the fruit of that labour of working collaboratively, albeit domestically, but working collaboratively with the various activist organisations that were lobbying government, that ultimately that success has paid off. The other, I suppose, to aid that as well, our equivalent of the National Farmers Union, the Irish Farmers Association, had created a dedicated horse committee covering both thoroughbred and sport horse breeding and issues. And collectively between the IFA group, the Equine Task Force and the Economic Group, those groupings played a significant part in lobbying government. And there's lobbying for funding, but as you, David, touched on earlier, there's also informing the political system about the issues, be it licensing, be it welfare, be it social license. Because without that informed view in the centres of power, regardless of what country we're operating in, decisions will be taken that affect our industry with or without us. So it's very important that we have that view. I'm not sure how the rugby ball slipped in there. So some of the shared challenges that we have identified, and mainly that Ruth had identified, and again working with the BEF, data and having reliable data to inform that political discussion and that discourse. Some of the data is actually appears on the outset as to be relatively simple and straightforward. The volume of leisure riders, for example, do we know, can we quantify how many people are engaged in our sports on a leisure basis? Do we know the quantum of land that's used in equestrianism? And then therefore, tangentially to that, the carbon footprint the wider carbon footprint then when you start to involve transport, generators, and so on. What we found through the research was that that taking those small steps, that in an Irish setting, we've, as federation, because we have a role from government in providing funding into the industry. We had reference earlier to breaking and schooling of horses. So some of the very small steps we've taken with social licence in mind, we've introduced funding schemes in Ireland last year to support schooling, but instead of referring to breaking, we're now referring to it as starting because of the connotation for non-equestrians as to the images that would be come to mind in terms of breaking a horse. So it's starting to work in terms of it is changing the use of language and the behaviour amongst our own community, but it is the fact that they have the incentive in a grant to support the activity. It probably does help the use of the terminology. The scale of the challenge as well was one of the things that had been identified in our discussions. And there is a sense from many in the community that the challenge is so great that what can I do? And there's so little that I as an individual yard owner, an individual athlete, even up to CEOs and federations. It's what can I do at an individual basis and what can we do? There is an old saying that the only thing for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And in a climate sense, the only thing for a climate disaster is for good people to do nothing. And we have seen through the White Griffin research, particularly in our own setting in Ireland, that there are some great examples and best practice examples of what good people are doing on a daily basis, from rainwater harvesting and greywater harvesting from wash bays where the water is collected and respread on sand arenas, therefore not using either well water, water extracted from rivers or worse, treated water to spread on sand arenas. We've seen composting, examples of composting, biodiversity, hedgerow management, and many more excellent examples of where individual owners, individual yards and livery yards are actually taking steps to improve their own environment around their business and in the areas that they can control. Within Ficina Lente, for example, it's an equestrian learning centre that provides an inclusive environment with a range of equine-related activities, including therapeutic riding, equine-assisted learning, and much more. The charity blends horticultural activity and biodiversity through their riding school and gardens. And as a climate practice leader, they're using that social enterprise model to actually promote equine therapy and life skills training. I will leave you with an old Irish saying, Ní nart go cur le chéile, which means there's no strength without unity. And again, it was touched on by earlier speakers about the independence within the sector. And we too have that independence in Ireland. And sometimes it is a challenge when you're particularly, again, going back to the speaking with one voice to government. We need unity of action across our islands at every level of the sport and sector, with everyone from the federations to athletes to breeders and suppliers, in fact, as well, all playing their part to tackle climate change. With that, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Denis. That was wonderful. Now, Simon has unfortunately had to leave us for the day, but I'm delighted to welcome onto the stage in his stead Victoria Murrell from the Thoroughbred Breeders Association. Victoria has been instrumental in the creation and ongoing work of the TBA in environmental sustainability and is more than well placed to field all of your questions, of which I'm delighted to say we've had so many that I can't actually look at them all on my WhatsApp. And I've been reliably informed that I have only 10 minutes, if that. So what I'm going to ask my speakers is, it would be great to get through volume of questions. So if we can have short, concise answers so we can answer as many as possible. First of all, question from the floor, if I may, and as all good practices go. If anyone has a question, raise your hand and a microphone will come to you. And while that's happening, I'd perhaps like to start with, there's a lot of good work to mitigate the impact of the equine sector on the environment. Is there also work being done to consider the impact of climate change on the national herd? Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can have a go. I think that was part of the drive behind the stud farm carbon calculator that we've created. We wanted to be able to understand our sector better, and having those aggregated totals around how much land is the thoroughbred breeding industry responsible for, how many horses, and then being able to better represent our members, the breeders, at government level, with the extension of the carbon calculator to other equestrian areas, then perhaps that broadens that view of the equestrian sector beyond the thoroughbred.
Fantastic, thank you. And to the lady at the back. And if you could stand and tell me who you are and where you come from.
Hello, I'm Eva Brümer. I'm Vice President of the World Breeding Federation. I'm a member of the UK Genetics and Livestock and Equine Committee. I'm a representative of the Anglo-European Stud Book, and I'm a director of British Breeding. Have I forgotten anything? No, great. So my question, given that we heard today about the great impact of our industry on the land, on the environment, and the economic contribution we make, as well as the contribution to health and welfare of people, and given the strains that we're under economically, with our small equestrian businesses, and I think we heard about this today very eloquently, and it's something that I hear at grassroots level a lot, and particularly pressure on breeders and small equine businesses in terms of paying business rates on their facilities. Would it not be sensible to consider equestrianism, particularly at grassroots, as an agricultural endeavour rather than a leisure endeavour primarily, and would that not be a great support to us all?
I'm going to throw that one over to Denis, just because you have practical real-life examples of that. What I would say is there's a lot of focus, or I think there's a misconception that sustainability equals expensive. But let's remember that sustainability often means using less of. So if you're using less energy, you're saving money on electricity bills. If you're using less water, you're saving money on your water bills. So sustainability is, in the broadest sense of the term, it's about environment and financial sustainability. But Denis, perhaps you can speak to your experience of that relationship.
Yeah, so in an Irish setting, it is treated as both, in effect. So what we found was that we have equine premises numbers, and I know speakers had earlier mentioned about the introduction of those in Scotland, England and Wales. We're able to track, along with the Department of Agriculture, the level of the level and the number of equine premise owners that are active in the farming sector versus those that are not, and roughly it's probably about 50% that are purely equine related, have no other farming activity. And what we found as well in particular is that the 50% that are engaged within the farming sphere are much better informed. They have a farm advisor engaged because of perhaps the beef or the sheep or the dairy enterprise that the horses are running alongside. And there are further benefits then through the various payments and the farm subsidies and so on that are of benefit to those breeders. We have, particularly I think with the addition of and the inclusion of equine measures within on-farm payments last year, it was a significant encouragement for the other 50% that are not caught in that net, if you like, to actually apply and start a journey. And there are knock-on benefits, because then they become exposed to having to engage with farm advisors, the grassland management, the other benefits that you've touched on Ruth, in terms of looking at costs and so on. So, and our sense is that yes, it's a benefit, and it's trying to encourage as many in the Irish setting, and to encourage as many equine breeders, particularly breeders and the leisure enthusiasts, to register and get involved. There are limits to that. Sometimes it's down to not having sufficient land, that somebody has 2 acres and they're able to keep 1 horse on it, but then therefore they fall outside of the net. But where we can, is to try and encourage, because there are tangential benefits.
Thank you. I'm going to go for 2 more questions. One that I think would be specifically good for you, Sarah, so I'm going to do that one, and then one that's been upvoted an awful lot. So this one I think is a great question. How can equine... No, don't worry, I'm not setting you up. How can equine businesses be encouraged to measure greenhouse gas emissions? For example, if emissions showed that different management practices could be more climate friendly, but implementing other practices would implicate financial costs, would some businesses not prefer to not assess or publish their emissions? What's your experience so far with how the breeders have responded?
Well, I think, I guess a combination of answers on that one. I mean, generally, using a carbon calculator will help you to identify where there are inefficiencies in your business. So the vast majority of the early actions that you can take, having done a carbon footprint, will be cost beneficial. So it will identify where there's potentially excess energy usage, excess feed, wastage, etc. So those actions, actually, by identifying them, you can almost use it as a little bit of an economic benchmarking tool that says, you know what, if I compare myself to my peers, I'm using more hay, I'm using more bedding, I'm using more of this. So what could I do differently? So actually, in the vast majority of cases, you shouldn't need to invest in huge amounts to get started on the climate journey. Now, you might find in the future that once you've whittled down all of your easy wins, that there are some things that you might want to invest in. But those will probably come further down the line when you've kind of become more into the process and actually maybe you're ready to invest anyway.
That's great. And I think perhaps also to refer back to what Ali was saying, this is about us businessifying how we approach things. When you know your impact, yes, it's a carbon tool, but exactly as Sarah's saying, if you're entering all these details, you're suddenly more aware, oh gosh, that is what I spend on water. Oh, that is how much money I spend on feed. And so it's, although obviously from our point of view as environmental consultants, this is about how do we reduce emissions and how do we promote better land management. Actually, as a business tool, I think that particularly the smaller businesses like the riding schools and livery yards that can use this will probably find that will help them in other areas that Ali in particular was talking about. One more, can I do one more from the floor and one more from my phone? Do we have time? Okay, one more from the floor. The lady at the back, I think, had her hand raised first, if you don't mind.
Thank you. My name is Ruth Bishop. I work actually for a leading feed manufacturer, probably one of the leading feed manufacturers in the country. But significantly here, I'm chairman of the Beta Feed Committee, and Beta is the British Equestrian Trade Association. I just want to commend the TBA and ADAS for a really great piece of work. So thank you very much, and opening our eyes on the various impacts. With regard to feed, of course, young growing animals and late pregnant mares, they need a lot of feed, so it's got its right place in the hierarchy of the emissions as you put up. But as an industry, we're really, really responsible, and we've got a great story to tell, and so I'd just like to say now we'd very much like to engage with that. For ourselves and the manufacturer that I represent, the brands that we manufacture for, my understanding, we do carbon footprint calculate our feedstuffs, and it's incredible to see the impact of moving from soya to deforestation-free soya. So it'd be interesting to see the data cleaned up, because I dare say the products that were in the survey might have been deforestation-free soya. And another thing is, another trend that we're doing is that we're moving away from soya. It's a great protein source. It's the best, so that's why we all like it. But there's many other sources that we can combine with other ways to make sure the horses are fed well. And then back to the story, the great story that feed has. It's an incredibly circular story. We use we recycle a lot of ingredients that human food wastes, and we use it in horse feed because what's not great for a human is great for a horse. And so there's a whole lot of really positive messaging about feed and feed management and horse owners' engagement with that to tell. So yeah, we can't wait to tell it.
Thank you, that's great. And actually, in the work we did with Denis, we highlighted I think I can say, can't I? Or maybe you should say rather than me as chair, that one of the case studies demonstrates the way that the supply chain, like yourself, are really stepping up to this challenge.
Yeah, that's right. You've met two companies as part of the research, Barnett Hall and Connolly Red Mills, and they support very much the point that you've made, particularly Barnett Hall, that were involved in grain trading, like the reduction, changing from deforested soya, things like that, had a significant impact. So Connolly Red Mills was the other company that had, so yeah, I can say it.
Yeah.
An Irish company, and again, it was about managing their supply chain, but equally, as you had said earlier, Ruth, it was solar panels, it was water reduction, it was looking at controlling the controllables within their own business.
And the supply chain have got such an important part to play in this, and it's great to see suppliers really stepping up to this challenge and seeing that positive narrative start to come through. We really applaud that. Okay, so one more then. I've got to choose between the two most highly voted, so I don't know which one to choose. Okay, let's go with this one. With ever-increasing rainfall and squeezes on available pasture, how do you think horse management and grazing is going to be impacted by environment change? And are you concerned that the concurrent increased stabling and surface turnout will impact both welfare and environmental concerns? So if I could just invite Rowley up onto the stage to say that one. It's a cracking question, probably needs an awful lot more time. Would anyone like to take that one?
Yeah, please. Yeah, so I think in terms of land management, we are going to have to think very differently about how we manage our land in the future. I mean, this year has been horrendous. And how do we think about how we can protect our pastures? We can't graze them bare in summer and expect them to be resilient through the winter. So we need to be thinking about how can we protect that grass, build that grass up such that it can sustain our horses for a longer period through wet weather. And that's about really good grassland management. It's about how we rotate our grazing. It's about how densely we stock our grazing. It's about how we graze in the summer. Can we graze smaller areas more densely in the summer to protect larger areas for the winter? It's about thinking, can we provide horses with dry places to stand? Standing out in a muddy bog through the winter is not good animal welfare, but providing them with stables, warm and cosy and beautiful fluffy beds, is also not necessarily good animal welfare. So how can we provide those basic needs, whether it's through provision of hard standing, whether it's through improving grassland management, whether it's through improving drainage, etc. But I do think, going back to the agriculture piece, we need to be managing our land far more carefully. So often, I think, especially in leisure businesses, we don't really think about the land as being the resource. It's just where we put the horses to exercise them and graze them.
That's right, and it's again about what we talked about at the World Horse Welfare Conference, this one welfare message, that we're not just talking about that human-horse partnership anymore. We're factoring the environment within that whole piece, and everything you've just said is a perfect articulation of that. That having it at the forefront of our mind now to care about the land as well as the horse is what's going to get us through, unfortunately, the inevitable tougher conditions that we've got coming up ahead. I'm pretty sure that's all we've got time for, although I haven't had any kind of death stares or anything, but I think I probably have to wrap things up now. So all I'd like to say is a huge thank you to my panellists and also to everyone in the room, thinking back to that timeline, the positive spirit, the openness, the intelligent thinking and the expertise that everyone in the room and everyone online is bringing to this subject matter is what's putting the equestrian industry far out in front in terms of how quickly we're answering the problems, how progressively we want to get there. There are people who've been at this for a long time and they notice this sea change now in the last year. So I want to thank that spirit. Absolutely say let's continue to collaborate. Everybody, find your unique voice and share that with someone else so that we can keep progressing as the days, weeks, months and years move on.